Welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in. I want you to start by picturing the human body, but not just as a physical structure. Think of it as this incredibly vast, glowing network of biological systems. Right beneath your skin lies a hidden, microscopic universe of neural pathways and intricate molecular cascades. These are the very systems that dictate your longevity, your resilience, and your ability to fight off invisible threats. Today we're going to explore the profound architecture of human health. We'll be breaking down the exact first principles of how our nervous and immune systems constantly communicate with one another. We're going to journey from the psychology of your daily stress all the way down to the intracellular pathways that are either actively protecting your body or quite literally tearing it apart.
Okay, let's dive into this, because we really need to completely challenge our fundamental understanding of rest. We so often think of sleep as passive downtime, right? Just a biological off switch. But in reality, sleep is an active, high-stakes immunological battlefield. So what actually happens to your immune memory when you lose just a single night of sleep? Well, the answer, as we'll uncover through rigorous clinical data today, is absolutely staggering. A single night of deprivation doesn't just make you feel groggy, it fundamentally alters the way your immune cells remember and respond to pathogens.
Here is our map for today's exploration into the hidden architecture of human resilience. We're going to cover the stress-immunity paradox, the anatomy of the HPA axis, the cellular immune battlefield, sleep's immunological synapse, melatonin and vaccine efficacy, and we'll wrap up with nervous system regulation.
Starting off with Chapter 1, the stress-immunity paradox, and how psychological stress dictates our biological health.
You know, stress isn't just an abstract feeling. It is a profound biological trigger. When you perceive a threat, whether that's a predator in the wild or just a looming deadline at work, your brain initiates a massive cascade of molecular events that completely reshapes your body's defenses. As the clinical literature so perfectly puts it, chronic stress disrupts the intricate balance of cytokines and immune cells, shifting the immune response toward either heightened inflammation or immunosuppression. And this paradox is the absolute foundation of our biological framework. Acute stress actually evolved to save our lives by temporarily mobilizing our defenses. But the modern burden of chronic psychological stress literally rewires our immune system. It makes us highly vulnerable to both infections and, terrifyingly, autoimmune destruction.
Let's zoom in a bit for Chapter 2. Anatomy of the HPA axis, your neuroendocrine command center.
To really understand how a fleeting thought becomes a physiological crisis, we have to look deep inside the atmospheric depths of the brain, at the body's primary stress regulation system. And this brilliantly illustrates a three-step command chain. First, a tiny structure in your brain, the hypothalamus, secretes corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. Think of this as a signal flare. That flare signals the pituitary gland right below it, which then releases adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, directly into your bloodstream. Finally, that ACTH travels all the way down to the adrenal glands sitting right on top of your kidneys, prompting them to just flood your body with cortisol.
Now, we must recognize the dual nature of cortisol here. It gets a bad rap, but in an acute response, cortisol is a lifesaver. It mobilizes glucose for immediate energy and acts as the body's master anti-inflammatory agent. And once the threat passes, cortisol naturally feeds back to the brain to shut the whole system down. However, and this is a big however, when chronic stress breaks this negative feedback loop, cortisol remains persistently elevated. Its protective properties turn toxic. It actively suppresses vital lymphocytes and severely diminishes our adaptive immune response.
Moving into Chapter 3, the cellular immune battlefield, specifically looking at mTAR signaling and the Th17 to TREG balance.
Let's move past the endocrine system and into the hidden war happening inside your immune cells when that HPA axis is chronically activated. Here we find a fundamental metabolic switch, the PI3K/ACT/mTOR pathway. This intracellular signaling cascade acts like a radar, constantly sensing the energy and stress levels in your body. When you're under chronic stress, this pathway becomes hyperactivated. And when this switch gets flipped by persistent stress hormones, it fundamentally alters the trajectory of your naive T cells. It literally changes what type of immune soldiers they grow up to be.
So the crucial point is that human longevity depends entirely on a delicate balance between two opposing forces. On one side, we have Th17 cells. These are aggressive, pro-inflammatory, highly glycolytic cells designed to destroy threats, but they can easily destroy your own tissue. On the flip side, we have regulatory T cells, or TRIGs. These are the peacekeepers. They're responsible for suppressing inflammation, creating immune tolerance, and maintaining systemic homeostasis.
Chronic stress and an overactive mTOR pathway tilt the scale violently away from the peaceful trigs and heavily toward those tissue-destroying Th17 cells. And this metabolic tipping point is the root cause of devastating autoimmune diseases. Just look at the data. Systemic lupus is characterized by activated mTOR and an impaired Treg population, which allows autoreactive Th17 cells to attack the body. In allergic asthma, that exact same pathway triggers a localized shift in the airway, causing eosinophilic infiltration. And in rheumatoid arthritis, chronic HPA dysregulation diminishes cortisol sensitivity at the cellular level. This elevates the Th17 to Treg ratio inside the synovial fluid, leading directly to joint degradation. The stress in your mind literally dictates the metabolic trajectory of your immune cells. Crazy, right?
Chapter 4. Sleep's Immunological Synapse. Let's look at nocturnal recovery and vaccine efficacy.
If chronic stress is the threat that tips the scale toward disease, deep rest is the mechanism that restores our biological balance. During sleep, your HPA axis is suppressed, creating this highly critical window where your body builds cellular memory. Let's be unequivocally clear about this number: 6 hours. Clinical meta-analyses have established that obtaining fewer than 6 hours of sleep per night in the days surrounding a biological challenge, like getting an influenza or hepatitis vaccination, severely cripples your adaptive immune response. Your body literally lacks the time required to form the immunological synapse between antigen-presenting cells and T helper cells.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer magnitude of the vulnerability. Losing just one night of sleep, dropping below that 6-hour threshold, causes a blunting of antibody titers that is equivalent to 2 full months of chronological antibody decay. Think about that. A single night of sleep restriction artificially ages your immune memory by 60 days. And this shows a massive statistical effect size of 0.79 in men.
But when we look closer at these clinical findings, we see some incredible nuance. First off, self-reported sleep diaries? Largely useless here. This severe blunting of antibodies was only observed in trials using objective measures, things like wearable actigraphy or polysomnography. Second, while the statistical effect is undeniably strong in men, the data in women highlights a critical need for better scientific study designs. Fluctuating sex hormones, like what happens during menstrual cycles or contraceptive use, heavily interact with immune signaling. We need rigorous control in future studies to fully map this effect in women. Lastly, we see profound vulnerabilities in immunocompromised groups. Acute sleep deprivation in HIV-positive cohorts causes severe systemic CD8+ T cell activation. It completely lacks the adenosine buffering that would normally protect their vascular tissue from damage.
Moving to Chapter 5. Melatonin and vaccine efficacy. Melatonin as the endocrine adjuvant.
Knowing how completely vulnerable our immune memory is to poor sleep, science is looking at how we can exogenously influence the system. And melatonin? It is not just an over-the-counter sleep aid, it's a pineal-derived endocrine messenger that acts as a potent antioxidant right at the cellular level. When studied as a vaccine adjuvant, its mechanics are incredibly sophisticated. It acts selectively. Instead of causing massive, disruptive global cytokine storms, exogenous melatonin stabilizes TGF-1 levels to prevent excessive inflammation. At the very same time, in individuals who already have a high baseline immunity, it actively boosts antigen-specific follicular helper T cells, so it fortifies the cellular battlefield safely and selectively, acting as an incredible all-in-one clinical adjuvant.
Which brings us to our final chapter. Chapter 6. Nervous system regulation and actionable behavioral interventions.
We've journeyed through the depths of neuroendocrine pathways, the mTOR metabolic switch, and the molecular consequences of sleep deprivation. Now let's zoom all the way out to the behavioral level. How do we actually ground this hard science in controllable daily actions? How do we manually regulate our own autonomic nervous system? Well, the answer lies in clinically validated behavioral interventions. Studies have demonstrated that participants practicing mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR techniques, can yield a massive 40% reduction in anxiety, depression, and stress. By intentionally leveraging your breath and focus, you can manually override the HPA axis and lower the systemic cortisol that would otherwise degrade your immune system.
Let's move to and see how this builds into actionable steps you can use today. You can activate your parasympathetic nervous system through deliberate, mindful breathing, just inhaling for 3 seconds, holding for 2, and exhaling for 4. You can utilize progressive muscle relaxation, which physically trains the brain to release tension by briefly flexing and then relaxing specific muscle groups. You can implement a 3-minute breathing space to pause and observe your thoughts without judgment, Or you can practice the observer meditation, deliberately detaching from intense emotional involvement to manually shut down that HPA stress cascade and stop the mTOR pathway from driving autoimmune inflammation.
Ultimately, all of this data converges on a single unifying truth. By deeply understanding these neuroendocrine immune pathways, we finally bridge the gap between mind and body. The daily practice of conscious breathing, the rigorous protection of a full night's sleep, and the deliberate management of psychological stress, these aren't just wellness buzzwords. They are precise biological strategies absolutely required to maintain the delicate balance of your T cells, promote true immune competence, accelerate tissue repair, and preserve your body's systemic homeostasis against the ravages of time and disease.
Which leaves us with the most important question of all. Knowing that every stressor you internalize and every hour of sleep you sacrifice directly rewires the very cells designed to protect your life. Are you actively regulating your biological battlefield, or are you just surviving it? The science is clear. The mechanisms are in your hands. The choice is yours. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible machinery of human health.